We have just 2 more videos, counting this one, left in the macOS tips that we've been posting, trying to get one every single day for the month. And for this video, I want to cover kind of an overview of system preferences, but I want to go through each one of the system preference panes. So to get to system preferences, just go up to the Apple and click on System Preferences from the Apple menu there. And this is what System Preferences looks like. I do have 4 additional preference panes at the bottom here, but these are third-party ones. I'm not going to cover those, and you might not see those on your Mac. But I want to cover all the ones that are built in here. And if you go up to the View menu, you do have options to either organize these alphabetically or by categories. So I personally do it by categories. This is the default, and this is what I've been doing forever. So this is how I'm used to seeing these apps, and this is how I'm going to show them. So if they show up differently, it might be because of that view setting. Change it to organize by categories. And so let's go through these. So the first one is the general system preference pane. And general has things like the dark mode that we talked about in an earlier video. Light view, you have things like your accent colors. So if I click in the search field here, we get the blue outline, but I could change that to purple, pink, red, and we get all kinds of different colors there. So this general system preference pane is kind of for some appearance type options here, but it also gives you appearance options for how the scroll bars show up on the right side when you're scrolling, what your default web browser is. We get some other options through here. So we talked about handoff, for example, on one. This is where you can enable that if it gets disabled, and some font smoothing options there. So that's what the general system preference pane is. What you'll see with any of these preference panes, or at least most of them, will have the question mark in the lower right corner. If you have a question about something that's on one of these, click on that question mark, and then it'll give you a detailed have a description of what each of these are. So for example, if you're not sure what like the scroll bars are, we could scroll down here and we see show scroll bars, and it gives us a description on the right side and what each one of those options are. So don't hesitate. If something doesn't make sense here, hit that little question mark and you'll get an idea of what that is. So that's the general system preference pane. Again, it's there's some random things in there. The rest of them are a little bit more specific. So for example, desktop and screensaver. We get the option at the top here to change the desktop wallpaper, which I currently have it set to the dynamic desktop for Mojave, where it'll change based on the time of day. But if I didn't want that, I could change it to a different option or a different picture through here. There's also the option here, if you're using a still picture, to change that picture every so often, which I do see some people do. And I would recommend against it as a Final Cut editor. I think, or I know, as far as processing on the computer, having it change a picture, especially if you have it changing every couple seconds, can be more processor intensive. So I would say avoid that if it's on an editing machine. Just use one of the built-in default ones, either the dynamic one or even just a still picture if you can. That's going to give you the best performance out of your Mac, because the computer just won't have to worry about it if it's just one still image. So that's the desktop options. If there is a specific picture you want to use when you're using a still picture, you can just drop it into this well, and it'll add that. And then similar to the desktop, we also have the screensaver that's going to be used. And you have a bunch of options for your screensavers in there. When they start, some people like to having the clock show up on the screensaver. So when you do that, you'll see in the screensaver, it'll actually put the time on there, which is a little bit more useful than maybe just having a random screensaver on there. But my favorite feature of this system preference pane is the hot corners. I would strongly recommend going through here and using the hot corners. What a hot corner is simply when you move your arrow all the way into the corner, what happens? So right now, if I move it all the way in the top right corner, it opens up Launchpad, which you can watch the Launchpad video to see that in action. But you can do a couple other things. So the most common thing, in my opinion, on my Macs, any that I've used, is I'll set the lower right corner to lock screen. And this will allow me, when I walk away from the computer, I'll throw my arrow down into the corner, and it will lock the computer and require a password when I come back to it. So a very nice way if you're walking away from your computer and it is in more of a public space, you can lock it while you go on break or do something else. And then when you come back, you'll be able to put your password in there. So hot corners in the desktop and screensaver preference pane. Next one is our dock. We have the dock at the bottom here. This is where you can go to customize various options. So for example, a newer feature is seeing these recent apps. If you don't want that, you can go to the dock preference pane, uncheck show recent apps in dock. And now you can see that recent apps section is gone. So if you don't want that, go in here, you can uncheck that box. Yeah, but play with the other options here if you want to change the way the dock works. In a similar fashion, we have mission control, which is used to show all of your apps in a specific layout. When they're all open, you can use this to spread them all out, and then they'll show in small little screens. So as an example, I have Safari open here. If I hit the mission control button, notice it spreads both of them apart here, so I can see the different apps I have open, and if I have multiple desktops, I can go up to the top and see those. Maybe I want a new desktop, I'll hit the plus, create one, I can move Safari over to that second desktop. So now I have desktop 1, and if I use my trackpad 3 fingers, I can move over to desktop 2 there. So that's mission control, and in the system preference pane here, you can customize those. You also get the hot corners at the bottom. So that's mission control. Language and region, not too much to say about here, but this is going to be set up when you normally turn on your computer for the first time. You'll be able to set this. If you do work in a different language or you switch between languages, you can go in here and add in multiple languages, and you'll see what region, calendar, all of that is set. If you need to change these, most likely you know what these are and what you want to set them to. But if you have any questions, hit the question mark button. Keyboard preferences we're going to get to in a second, but that's here because many people that change the language or the region need to get to the keyboard to change that as well. And then some of the advanced settings are more related to specific formatting on numbers. So you'll see that in here with dates, with times. This is the way everything is formatted normally, but you can go in here and customize this if you want to. Cool. You do have restore defaults. You'll see this on a couple of the other preference panes as well. Awesome. And then next one over, we have security and privacy. This is a really important one for how your computer is staying secure. One thing I'll point out in this one, but you'll see in other preference panes, if you have stuff that's grayed out, you need to put in the password for the computer to make those changes. Just hit this lock. It'll ask you to sign in with your account. You'll unlock it, and then you can make changes. So one thing I see people run into, especially with Final Cut, you'll get plugins and other apps that are maybe not identified to developers or from the App Store. You'll be able to go into this preference pane and allow those apps to be opened up. We have things like FileVault, which is the encryption for your computer. You can customize the firewall if you have that enabled. And again, all of these, just hit the question mark. It'll go into a lot more detail about what each of the options are. But this is where you'll see those. Privacy is kind of cool. You can go in and set specific apps. So for example, the microphone, I've given access to ScreenFlow and GarageBand, but you can disable what apps have access to those features right in here. Again, you might deny an app a specific feature, maybe access to the camera. And if you've denied that, you may go into an app and it'll say we need to get access to the camera, but we don't have the permission to do so. It'll point you here to the system preference pane for security and privacy to enable that feature. That's there. Spotlight we talked about is the search. You can go in here to disable some of the search results. Yeah, you can also go in here and block certain folders from being searched. So if you go to privacy, you can hit the plus and you can add a folder to this list, and it'll block Spotlight from searching that folder, especially if you have sensitive information. Spotlight's great at indexing everything, but if there's certain information you don't want to come up or you don't want to be found easily, make sure you block it on the block that folder from being indexed by Spotlight so that it can't be found. It's kind of a, I don't know, it kind of goes both ways because that person, whoever's trying to find it, could just go into the Spotlight preferences and search privacy and be able to see what you've blocked, but you know, it's kind of goes both ways with that part. But anyway, that's Spotlight. Next one we have is notifications. So if you think of the Top right corner, we have the notification center. This is where you can control all of the apps that are on your computer and which ones are able to show notifications. So as an example, Final Cut Pro displays by default banners that will come up when you're done sharing a project. And I usually like those, but if you don't like those coming up, switch it to none, and then you won't see the banners displayed when a share is completed. But this is where you can control that for all of the other apps as well. So that's our first kind of column there. I would say for the most part, those are the major preferences that a lot of people change right when they get their first computer and customize it. The next ones are more hardware related, and that's what this category is. So we have first the display system preference pane, which if you have multiple displays, which I do on this computer, it'll actually put a second preference pane over on the other display, and I can just move those both here. So you can customize each one of your displays to brightness, whatever the resolution is that you want. You could change the resolution in here, and you get control for each of those displays. The other option we have here is AirPlay display, which I have off, but I could AirPlay over to my Apple TV. And you'll see those show up on the list down there. I didn't mention this with the other ones, but some of these have the option to show these options in the menu bar. And if I go up to the top here, you can see my menu bar is pretty quiet at the top right. But if I wanted to, I could show the display options here. Now I have AirPlay at the top. Really easy to get to these instead of having to go into system preferences. Cool. So that's the display preference tab in the preference pane here. You also get arrangement if you have multiple displays. So again, I have a second display that's physically to the right of my iMac. So that's why I have it over here. If it was on the left, I would move it over to the left, or any option here for arrangement. If you have more than two displays, your computer and your secondary, maybe you have a third one or a fourth one, this is where you can go to arrange all those to make sure that when you drag a window from one side to another, that it actually goes over to that other display. We also get some color options. Not going to go into too much detail here, but you can calibrate and set profiles for your color scheme that's on your Mac. And then we have night shift as well. If you want, you can turn this on so that when it does get darker, your display will actually shift, very similar to what happens on iPhones and iPads, and changing the color temperature, which as an editor with Final Cut, if you want color to be accurate, you might not necessarily be using this feature because it will change the way the color is, but it's really nice on your eyes if you can use this feature. Okay, display preference panes. Energy saver, more important on a mobile computer and a laptop like a MacBook Pro, because you'll get options in there to change what happens when it's on battery versus when it's plugged in. But we do get some options here for when the display actually turns off. If hard disks are being put to sleep, like external hard drives, which right now I don't have that, so that means those external drives are always running. So this might be a better thing to turn on to save the life of those. And you get some other options too for how power is consumed by your computer. The next two are keyboard and mouse. So this changes how your keyboard really works with the Mac. And these are very subtle things, but it can be as simple as how quickly will a key repeat when you hold your finger on a specific key. And these are going to be more personal preference than anything, but definitely go through and play with these. You'll see the battery life if it is a wireless keyboard. On the Mac keys, by default, for example, the F1 and F2 keys are to change the brightness of the display of the computer, but we could check this box, use F1, F2, etc. for the standard function keys. So if you do need those, you can change that over. Some other things in here that are pretty cool. You have text replacement, which I use very frequently on my other account here, because I can type in a shortcut and have it fill in an entire length of something. So for example, if I go into Spotlight here, I'm going to do OMW, and actually I think Spotlight's the one place where it doesn't put it. Let's go into text edit. I'll show you this one, just so you can see it. So on my way, and notice it pops up with the replacement. I'm just going to hit the space bar to keep typing, and it replaces it with the word that comes up there. So that's what the text replacement is, and you get some options for that. We don't need this. We also have shortcuts. So this shows us all the shortcut keys. And occasionally I'll have someone that has an issue with one of their shortcuts they're trying to use. And if that happens, then we'll usually go in here into the system preference pane, because these shortcuts will usually override everything else. So it's possible you've added an app or accidentally enabled a shortcut key that enables something here. So if that's the case, you can go in here. If you don't know about these things, though, like screenshots, for example, these are the shortcuts used to create and take a screenshot. Definitely go through and check out some of the shortcuts that you get on here. And you can customize any of these too just by clicking on it. You can say add shortcut if it's something that you want to use frequently. Any of these, you can always say restore default. It'll go back and do that. We have input sources. Right now we just have a USB keyboard, but if I wanted to, I could use a different keyboard, let's say the British keyboard. And then we can see now we have a British input method, same keyboard, so it didn't make a change, but you'll see those options there. Then we have dictation. I'm not using dictation right now, but I could turn this on, and this would allow me to dictate into the Mac. And what I speak then would be translated into text, kind of like a speech-to-text option there. Cool, so that's keyboard. And then mouse, very similarly to the keyboard options, you can change how the keyboard types. You can do the same thing here with the mouse. Depending on which mouse you have, it'll let you change, is there a secondary click on the right? All those options, you'll see the different gestures for that. And I have a trackpad, so same way if I switch over to the trackpad here, I can enable tap to click, for example. So then if I just lightly tap on the trackpad, it's the same thing as clicking it. And all of these, you'll see a little video to give you a demo of what each of the controls does on the trackpad. So if you don't know those things are there, those gestures are part of the reason the trackpads are so big, and it allows you to do multiple finger input. So definitely check those out and use those if you have not. Next piece of hardware that I can't wait for it to just go away. We see printers and scanners. You'll see the ones on the left column for the ones you use with your computer. You can hit the plus to add a printer, minus to get rid of them. You have the printer there. You can go in and scan, and you can actually open the scanner app right from here in System Preferences. So this is how we get the built-in scanner app to macOS that's for this specific printer. And you would see a preview of whatever's on it if there was something on it there. If you have printer issues or scanner issues, this is a great place to start to see what's happening. And if you open the print queue and supplies, you'll get all of those utilities for those specific printers. And then we have sound, which this is for speakers connected to your computer, and also sound options. So I use apps like Soundflower and some other ones to connect and record and do other things. So you'll see all those inputs here and outputs. So if there is problems with the audio around your computer, go in here to output and input, and you'll see those. We can see right now with the input, by default, it's going to use the built-in microphone that's here, and the output is going out to our internal speakers, our built-in, and we see sound effects as well. If you don't like the sound effect made when you get an error, you can change that from in here. Again, all of these, if there's any questions with them, just hit the little question mark down there. It'll give you a nice description about that. Cool. And then when you turn on your computer right now, the startup disk is the hard drive essentially that it's going to boot off of, which right now I just have my one built-in storage drive of an SSD in this iMac, and that's the one that it's going to boot off of. But if I do have multiple hard drives or partitions with other versions of macOS, maybe I have an older 10.13 version, I'd be able to see that here, and I could select it as the startup disk, where it actually goes in and starts up from that drive instead of the built-in one. If every single time you turn on your computer, it's going to a different system, not the one you want it to, check the startup disk preference pane. You can also easily just enable target disk mode if you're trying to transfer stuff to a different Mac here. Cool. So that's the startup disk. That's the hardware category. Our next one is more internet and services based. So if you have an iCloud account, you can click on iCloud and sign into it here. You will see a whole list of all of the iCloud settings, which I think we talked about in a different video there. Same thing, internet accounts. These are things like your Google Gmail account or Yahoo Mail. and anything else. You can go and add in and basically any of these types of accounts in here. And then that's essentially giving the Mac access to those accounts in some way. So, for example, adding a Yahoo account, you'll get access to your calendar, contacts, and email from those apps. I think notes as well. Cool. Internet accounts. We have software update. This one, I usually recommend keeping the Mac up to date if this is a personal computer, but for those of you that are editors, you might not want to have it automatically keeping up to date because that might download a new version that you don't want. You haven't had time to back up your old version. You can go here in advance and customize which apps it's going to install automatically, but just be careful with this one and make sure that you have it set with the setting that you want. Cool. We then have our network settings. I'm not going to open this one, but this just shows you things like your internet connection, whether you're on Wi-Fi or Ethernet. You can customize how you're connected to a network, both the internet, but also just a network that's locally with your devices. If you're in an edit suite or working with an IT department, they'll have you go in here pretty frequently. In a similar fashion, we have Bluetooth. All of our Bluetooth accessories will show up here. So you can see I have a keyboard, I have a Magic Trackpad, I have a couple Magic mice. So those will all show up on here. And these are where we see those devices. If there's a device on here you don't use anymore, say I don't use this mouse too, I can hit the X to remove it. It says, are you sure? And yes, I do want to remove it. And that will remove it from automatically being connected. And like other ones, you can have this show in the menu bar. You do get some advanced controls for what happens when certain things are connected. If you find you are in an edit suite where everyone has all these Bluetooth mice, it can be kind of annoying if you have some of this stuff enabled for it to automatically connect. So you can go in there and disable it. But just understand those controls before you go to it. Okay, cool. Getting towards the end here, the extension system preference pane, this shows you all kinds of different apps that are kind of like add-ons to your Mac that you've added. So, for example, I use the OmniFocus app to be my advanced to-do list. So I can actually see the OmniFocus here. Do I want OmniFocus to show up in the share menu or in the today view? You can enable those things in here for each of those apps that are on here. So this is just going to be very unique to each of your systems depending on what third-party apps you do have installed. But you'll see those extensions and be able to control those from that system preference pane. Our next one is sharing. The sharing system preference pane allows you to control how this Mac shares with others on the network. This includes the ability like enabling screen sharing. So you should definitely understand what this preference pane does, but I kind of want to give an overview of it, but again, don't think that this means everything. But essentially, by enabling screen sharing, this doesn't mean that just anyone can go on and share my screen and see my computer screen. What this is saying is that I've allowed access for only these users, which in this case is just administrators of this computer, to be able to share the screen. So if I was on another Mac, I could go in and hit the share screen feature, and I could sign in with the username and password of an administrator of this Mac, and then I'd be able to share the screen and see what's there. So if you know 100% you're never going to do screen sharing, file sharing, or any of these other things, go and uncheck those, and then that's one less vulnerability that your Mac might have, because then you've disabled that. But just some people think that when you enable this, that means everyone in the world can all of a sudden share your screen. That's not anywhere near the case. So that's the sharing preference pane. And then we have our final list down here at the bottom. Users and groups will show you a list of the user accounts that are on the Mac. This is where you go to add or remove a user account. You could go in and add an account that's maybe a child of yours, and that's where you get parental controls, and you can go in and enable these for a specific user account. And there's some pretty cool things in here that you can do with the built-in parental controls, and I would strongly recommend if you are a parent, go in here and enable these things. Or if you're an administrator that doesn't have maybe some advanced tools to monitor usage of the computers, parental controls might be an option for you as well. But this allows you to go through and limit access to specific apps, and it allows you to enable things like time limits. So especially for kids, you can say you get 3 hours a day or whatever time limit you want to put on it. you can enable that here in preferences, and you're letting the computer work for you instead of you having to go in and do all the different settings. So, well, we did a specific video on Siri, but this is where you can go to enable Siri, disable it, or change some of the settings for Siri. We have date and time, which this will show you the current date and current time, and allow you to adjust what time zone you're in, the clock itself. It's just kind of a little call out here. What I see happen every once in a while is there'll be some weird glitches happening on the computer. It won't necessarily be acting the way that it should be. And what happens every once in a while is the clock will get out of sync. So right now it is 3:24. If for some reason it gets out of sync, it might think that it's actually further ahead, further behind, a different time. And the clock is so important on the computer because that's how websites verify information. It's how apps verify that data is getting copied correctly, and a lot of other really important things. So if you're having weird issues, go in here, uncheck set date and time automatically, wait a second, and then check it off again. That should go through and resync the clock to the time that it is right now. And a lot of times it'll fix issues. If you think of for security purposes, a lot of people are using two-step verification, and they might be using a number generator that you get. If you're using an app on your computer to generate those numbers are based on the time. So if your time is 2 minutes ahead or even 30 seconds ahead, you might generate a number that's only valid for 10 seconds. And if the clock is wrong, nothing's going to sync up correctly. So just go in here, make sure that those things are set correctly. You can see I'm based in Los Angeles here, so it shows that. We see the clock information. I don't have the clock currently on the menu bar, but I could go and enable it through here. Awesome. We're on the home stretch here. So Time Machine, very simple. This is how you back up your computer. I've done a video on that. You can go and watch that. And then we did a whole thing looking at some of the accessibility features, and that's where you'll see all of those. Again, all of these you can, or most of them, you can enable the option to show these in the menu bar if it's a feature you use frequently. Otherwise, if it's something you don't use, you don't have to show that in the menu bar. But that's an overview of system preferences and all the preference panes that are included with your Mac there. Again, anytime, go up to the Apple, hit System Preferences, you can go into that. If there's a question you have about any one of these preference panes that I did not answer or cover, because I just gave you a quick overview, don't hesitate. Put it in the comments below or send an email to finalcutprohelp@me.com.